Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to theCUBE's live coverage of Snowflake Summit 2025 here in San Francisco, California. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight, alongside my co-host and analyst, Dave Vellante. I would like to welcome Anahita Tafvizi. She is the Chief Data Analytics Officer at Snowflake. Welcome, Anahita.
Thank you so much, excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So, I want to ask you about your career because it's a really interesting one. You've had data analytics roles at some of the most marquee companies there are. Let me see, Google, eBay, Instacart.
Right.
I'm curious if you want to start talking a little bit about how those experiences throughout your career have informed your approach and how you do your job at Snowflake.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, I've had the privilege of running the data teams for some of the most interesting and some of the most intellectually challenging problem spaces in the industry. So I started my career in tech at eBay, where I ran the data team there for the advertising section of the business. Then I went to YouTube and Google, and then I joined Instacart actually early on in the pandemic. It was a very interesting time to be there across a four-sided marketplace. So the number of data challenges were really very, very, very interesting. It's always like thinking about how do you solve all these trade-off problems across a four-sided marketplace. And I was a customer of Snowflake then at Instacart, so that was an interesting perspective to have, the lens of the customer. I joined Snowflake November of last year, so it's been less than a year, but it's been really incredible. There's no better place to be in this interesting age of data and AI than Snowflake today, so I'm very excited to be here. The role that I play here is similar to the roles I've had in the past, which is bringing the data to inform the decisions. Whether it's a product launch decision, whether it's a revenue acceleration decision. The second component of it is smart operations, so using the right data to create the right targets, to create the right accountabilities, to make sure that the teams focus on the right targets. And then at Snowflake, I have the privilege of also being the first customer of our own product, which creates an interesting dynamic with us on our product team, but also with us and then the customers, because I do a lot of customer meetings telling them how do we use our own products internally, what we have learned, the mistakes we have made, so that hopefully they will avoid it, but also showing them the magic of our product. So it's been a very interesting experience being here.
So in the sea of C's, I want to ask you about, there's Chief Data Officer, there's now Chief Data AI Officer, there's Chief Data and Analytics Officer, which you are, Chief Digital Officer, Chief AI Officer, then there's the CIO, the CSO, the CISO, on and on.
Many of
now,
those.
What's interesting is you're relatively new to Chief Data Officer.
That's right.
So if you think about the history of the CDO, it started as this sort of back office function.
That's right.
In highly regulated industries, and it was about data quality.
Yeah.
And it was really boring. It was important, but nobody even knew it was important. That evolved, and then the big data era, it got more important, it got more prominence. The title came out.
Yes.
The compensation went up, which is a good thing. Okay, now everything's getting sort of munged together. So how do you think about, as somebody who doesn't have all that, I don't mean it as a pejorative, but all baggage, how do you think about the role? What is the role? Yeah,
you're absolutely right. I mean, the role has very much evolved, and I'd say it's never been more strategic and central than now, right? It's like at this age of data and AI, the role is like, not only you bring the right data and insights, but how do you accelerate decisions? How do you bring the right AI technology also to the organizations? How do you help with the data literacy across the organization? And then how do you balance the technology and the speed of innovation with the governance and the foundations that's needed to get there? So we spend a lot of time constantly thinking about these tensions of governance versus innovation velocity. And I would say that may be the difference between the role of CTOs, which primarily focus on technology and innovation, the CIOs, which are primarily focused on the governance, and then the CDOs, which kind of have to balance the both. So yeah, it's certainly a very interesting time to be in this role.
So it's interesting though, and I think it's forward thinking, that you don't have AI in your title. I think I'm right about that. And I was talking to John Rose about this. He's the CTO and the Chief AI Officer at Dell, and I was asking him about that role. And he's like, look, eventually the Chief AI Officer is going to go away.
Yeah.
It's going to be embedded
Everybody's-
into
exactly.
all the different
Exactly.
Cs. And that's, you're sort of front running that.
Yes, in fact, interesting, when we started using a lot of our own AI products internally, I had this moment of thinking about my own organization and should I create a separate AI forward team within the data organization to really focus on how do we make our data AI ready, how do we build the right semantic models, or do I keep it decentralized? And then I came to the same realization as you're saying, is like, AI has to be everyone's job, not just one team's job, and so we kept it within every team, embedded in every team, and we want everyone to think about how to future-proof the technology, how to future-proof the solutions that we are building, and like basically look at AI as part of their job. So I agree with you. I don't believe that we need necessarily a chief AI officer because it should be everybody's job. Yeah.
So Snowflake often talks about being customer zero, and you started this conversation by talking about how you are users of your own products, and you are helping iterate those products, giving ideas for them. Talk a little bit about how that works and how that creativity, that innovation, that culture is created here.
Yeah. It's one of the most interesting aspects of my role. I've really, really enjoyed it. It's different from other kind of data leadership roles that I've had, which is very focused on driving internal decisions and internal smart operations, into like really think about the product and constantly thinking about how do I use the product while it's still being built, and then how do I constantly bring the voice of the customer to these conversations, and then how do I go and show it to the customer? So it's actually had this very interesting new addition to the role that we have, especially at Snowflake. We do use all of our products before they go to the hands of our customers. One of the examples of that were announced today at the Platform Summit was the Snowflake Intelligence, which we have been working with the Snowflake Intelligence product team over the last few months. And one of the use cases of the Snowflake Intelligence is what we have built internally that we call GTM AI Assistant. And it's been very interesting to work together with the team as we develop this interesting technology for our customers while being the first users of it, find the magic of the product, and show it internally to our own GTM organization, but also find all the ways that it can potentially go wrong, and then help the product team see that from the lens of the customer, whether it's role-based access control, or how do you think about governance, how do you think about the speed, how do you think about the quality, right? Like, how do you make sure that these AI natural language interfaces actually will get it correct, right? Like the Snowflake Intelligence that we use internally for our GTM team has access to both your structured and unstructured data through a natural language interface. So you go in as a seller and you can ask questions of your data, whether it's your unstructured data, such as your sales enablement materials, your training materials, your latest pitch decks, and you want to know where to find them, what's the latest talking points that we have been using with the customers, or you want to ask a question from your structured data. For example, how has been the revenue of this particular customer, what are the use cases they're using, or how should I think about the competitors of my customers and what are the use cases they have with Snowflake so that I can go encourage my customer to also use that. That requires then the agent to go work across all these sources of data, sometimes run a SQL query, sometimes do a search query. And so then when it goes to the hand of the customer, the question is, how do they know it's correct? Like, how can they have the trust for this data? And as you have been hearing a lot today, we're all about easy, connected, and trusted. So trust is one of the most important value props of our product. And so we have had a lot of conversations around what is our launch criteria? When do we think the product is ready? How good the quality needs to be? And we held a very high bar that we really believe that the quality for when you use your data has to be 100%. It's a very binary question. If I ask how much was my Q1 revenue, there's only one correct answer. You cannot be almost correct, right? And you can't also be 95% of the times correct, because you never know as a salesperson, am I now in the 5% bucket or am I in the 95% bucket, right? And it's a SQL query, you can see the SQL query, but as a seller, you might not be familiar with that, right? And the whole point of this is like democratizing access to data to people who don't write codes in SQL or Python. So it doesn't really help that we are giving them necessarily that SQL as a way to ensure quality. So we held the bar really high. We said, we have to be 100% accurate. yes, we show the SQL query. We also, as you saw in the demos today, we have a verified query badge next to it so the user can know when they can trust the data and when it's something that has been created by the data teams.
I have like 10 questions from what you just said.
Let's do it.
Okay, but so on the Q1 revenue example,
Yes.
it's not as simple. Getting 100% is not necessarily easy because how do you know that it's not, bookings that you're getting?
Yes.
Or maybe it's quarterly versus annual revenue. So you've got to figure out how to harmonize all that. And then, so how did you handle that? How do you harmonize that?
So this is basically what we call the semantic layer, right? Where it's like, how do you translate your data with the business context so that when you ask a natural language question, it can actually then understand what you're talking about. What does fiscal year mean in the context of Snowflake? What does a GVP mean in the context of Snowflake? It's a global vice president. It's a very specific to Snowflake business context. But then when you look at these data tables, you just like see something says fiscal year 25 or it says GVP, you're like, okay, what does it mean? So like translating that, like adding that translation layer is the important job that you have to do to make your data AI ready, and that's the semantic layer that we have talked about. And one of our product announcement today is like, how do we make that easier to do for the data teams? So that's one aspect of it, is like adding that translation layer to your data. The second aspect is like in order to build a trust, you have to like create a long list of verified queries, right? Like so if a user comes in and asks a question about consumption revenue, this is the table you go to. If they ask a question about booking, this is the table you go to. If they ask a question about use case, this is the table you go to. And these are the verified queries. So when the user now goes and asks this question, they will see if it uses a verified query for that particular question, they will get this green badge and they can know that this is the correct answer and they can trust it. We also then on the background like look at these questions and look at the answers that it's given, and if we find that the model is making any mistakes, then we go and add another one to the verified list of queries, right? So then over time the model like gets even better and better as well.
Now, you mentioned like, you gave an example of sales presentations. I want to key on that one.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not, well, Snowflake's now 10 years old. So, but for a lot of companies, this might have even been a bigger problem. Did you have to go through, when you applied AI, did you have to go through a curation process? Because any salesperson can create a sales deck,
yes,
put it up in the shared drive, and then it becomes, it's got, maybe it's emphasizing warehouse. Well, we say data cloud now. I mean, did you have to go through a curation process, and then how did you adjudicate going forward?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think part of this again goes back to the tension between how wide do you want to make the scale of, I guess, your solution versus the quality of it. Because to your point, you can give access to your entire Slack messages, entire Google Drive. Now, there's more context, but is it high quality context? Or you can curate a specific set of pitch decks, enablement materials. So the approach that we took is a very curated set of materials that we update and keep regularly, that we then use for these agents so that it can always give you the data that you can trust. Yes, but there is different models that you can think of, and whether you want to give it more context but then be okay with like a lower quality or not. Yeah.
Planning cycles rely on analytics, right? Good analytics, and I think of, I don't know how Google did it. I'm more familiar with Amazon's OP1, OP2. They're kind of famous, but and I know they're not static documents, but they kind of are static documents. So how do you balance the need for kind of real-time planning with what historically has been this annual planning cycle? Snowflake, I'm probably best in class at that.
Yeah, we do annual planning, just like many companies, and then we do quarterly planning on the product side. On the finance side, which my team helps, is like we do a revenue forecasting, and we do that using sophisticated data series and statistics modeling in order to do forecasting, and that forecast gets updated on a daily basis. So we do use for that as well. We use our own Snowflake as well for that. Yeah.
I want to ask about agents, because there is so much momentum and buzz around them, but that comes, of course, with new questions around trust and security and governance, especially at a time where there's scary new research saying that there's evidence that agents have agency and have capacity to be manipulative. How do you think about that balance in terms of wanting to go forward with the momentum, but also needing to make sure you are doing things right as you're innovating?
Yes, so we have actually, like, that tension is very real. In fact, today we had a CDO panel, and one of the questions we were discussing with other data leaders across the industry was that balance between governance and execution velocity or innovation velocity. And you're right, it's a very interesting times that there's things that are changing on a weekly basis, and on one hand you want to like really keep up, on the other hand you really want to be worried about trust and governance, right? And so we have, I really think of trust and governance as foundations to enable innovation versus as a, against innovation, if you will. Yes, it does take time, but it actually then creates better solutions and creates better trust with your users ultimately. So we have been very strong on ensuring that there is the right governance, there is the right foundation on the data side, and then providing that solution to our customers as well. Now on the product side, we spend a lot of time also on thinking about how to make that easy. Again, if you go back to the easy, connected, and trusted, how do you bring both easy and trusted to the product area, right? So like, for example, even this creation of semantic models in an automated way is one of the ways that, one of the examples of how do we, or like, flowing your access controls from your Snowflake to your agents is another way that you can make sure that you continue to have the governance but not make it very difficult for the customers.
What would you say, a weird question, is the number one thing that people, maybe it's misconception, or the thing that they get wrong about data, or mistake, what's the number one thing that you would say, don't do that?
I'd say, one of the things, and I don't know if that's necessarily a number one, but one that is like top of mind, I will tell you is, as a data professional, as many data professionals will tell you, agent sprawl has been, dashboard sprawl has been a problem problem that we've all dealt with. Like, anybody comes in, builds a dashboard, now you look at these data, you're like, which one is correct? This is the right metric, they're not the same
ARR,
metrics.
NRR.
You answer all your questions about, like, is this the right quarter? Why are these data not matching? And it doesn't really help. Like, yes, you have more dashboards, you have like built them faster, but now you have all of these and you don't even know which one you should be looking at. And I do worry that agent sprawl will be the new dashboard sprawl, right? So back to the point about how do you ensure the right governance, how do you make sure the right quality, how do you make sure that you certify all of your agents and that when you give it to the users, they know which ones they can trust is an important one that we are really trying to prioritize.
Yeah, so it's maybe
Snowflake.
Overestimating how easy it is.
It is easy. It is easy, but I think that the trade-off with being easy is that anyone can make it, and so then how do you make sure that it's actually done correctly, and it's trustworthy, and it's based on the right data, and again the right access controls and everything that we talked about.
Easy doesn't mean quality.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Anahita. A pleasure having you on theCUBE.
Likewise. Thank you so
very much.
I appreciate that.
I'm Rebecca Knight for Dave Vellante. Stay tuned for more of theCUBE's live coverage of Snowflake Summit. You're watching theCUBE, the leader in enterprise tech news and analysis.